What if 2026 doesn't bring a crash, but everything around you quietly becomes more expensive, more complicated, and harder to predict all at once? That is the fear gripping many Californians right now. It is not because of one single shocking law. It is because of a wave of new regulations taking effect at the exact same time, hitting the smallest, most essential parts of everyday life. Grocery trips do not feel the same. Bills go up and you are not always sure why. Rent, healthcare, wages, and basic living costs all start shifting simultaneously. Without a clear explanation of where you fit in, the real fear isn't just whether these laws are good or bad. It is the sinking feeling of being pulled into a system that is changing too fast, with absolutely no time to prepare. Eventually, the question stops being, how does this law affect me? And becomes, am I quietly paying the price for changes I never chose? Number 1. Rising costs everywhere. The minimum wage increase hits consumers, too. Most Californians won't remember the exact day the minimum wage rises in 2026. There won't be a siren, a breaking news alert, or a moment that clearly marks the shift. What many people will remember instead is something much smaller and more unsettling. Standing at the grocery checkout, seeing the total, and feeling that quiet thought creep in. This used to be easier. That is how this change enters everyday life, not as a headline, but as a feeling that settles in before you can even explain it. In 2026, California's statewide minimum wage increases to $16.90 an hour, one of the highest in the country. On the surface, it sounds simple and positive. Higher wages are supposed to ease pressure, give workers more breathing room, and help families stay afloat. For many people earning close to minimum wage, that benefit is real. But wages do not rise in isolation, and that is where the story becomes more complicated, especially for seniors and anyone living on a fixed income. When labor costs increase, the effects do not stay confined to paychecks. They ripple outward and quietly reshape the cost of everyday life. Businesses rarely announce these adjustments out loud. They do not say prices are going up because of minimum wage. Instead, the changes show up slowly and almost invisibly. A dollar added to a meal, a small service fee that wasn't there before, portions that shrink slightly, discounts that quietly disappear, hours of operation that change. You don't feel it all at once. You feel it over time, across dozens of moments you cannot easily avoid, and that is what makes it so hard to pin down. Think about the things that aren't luxuries, but are essential to staying independent. The diner you have gone to for years, the barber or stylist who knows you by name, the mechanic you trust, the person who fixes things around your home when something breaks. These are not indulgences. They are part of how people maintain a normal life. When those costs rise, choices start to narrow. Even if nothing dramatic happens overnight, for retirees and older Californians, this is where the tension becomes personal. Many are no longer earning wages at all. Their income comes from Social Security, pensions, or savings planned carefully years ago. Those numbers do not adjust when wages rise. They stay fixed while prices move around them. So while the system talks about higher pay and progress, a large group of people experiences only the side effects, higher costs with no matching increase in income. This pressure doesn't arrive as a single breaking point. It builds slowly. You don't panic over one higher bill. You don't panic when one service costs a little more. But when it happens again and again, something changes emotionally. People begin to hesitate. They start delaying decisions. They quietly cut back on things that once felt routine, not because they want to, but because they are constantly recalculating. What makes this especially difficult is that when change happens this way, people tend to blame themselves first. They assume they are budgeting poorly or not managing money as well as they used to. It takes time to recognize that the environment itself has shifted and that the rules quietly changed in the background. By the time that realization arrives, many adjustments have already been made. This is why the minimum wage increase feels different from other laws. It doesn't force a sudden decision or create an immediate crisis. Instead, it reshapes the background of daily life. Transportation, personal services, home maintenance, dining out, and basic errands all begin to feel heavier. You don't see one dramatic moment where everything breaks. You feel a steady tightening that is harder to talk about, but impossible to ignore. The impact is also uneven, which adds another layer of uncertainty. Some people benefit directly, others absorb the cost indirectly. Many don't know which group they are in until months later when they look back and realize how much they have already adjusted. Fewer outings, fewer small repairs, more moments of saying, "I'll deal with it later." It doesn't feel dramatic enough to warn others about, but it is persistent enough to matter. For older Californians, there is an added fear beneath all of this. Retirement is built on predictability. Decisions are made years in advance based on what life is expected to cost. When prices rise across the board, it feels like the ground is moving under plans that were already set. You can't go back and renegotiate your income. You can only change how you live, one small decision at a time. Number 2, renting gets more complicated. Mandatory appliances in rental units. What if your apartment doesn't change in 2026, but the rules around it do? No eviction notice, no dramatic renovation, no moving truck parked outside. Just a new definition of what the state considers a livable rental, and a growing sense that this quiet change could eventually reach your rent, your lease, and your feeling of stability. That is the tension many California renters are walking into, especially older renters who have stayed put for years precisely because predictability matters more than upgrades. Starting in 2026, California law requires most rental units to include a working stove and refrigerator as part of the minimum standards for habitability. In the past, housing laws focused on core safety needs like heat, hot water, electricity, and structural soundness. Kitchens were often treated as flexible. Some units came with appliances, some didn't, and renters adjusted based on what they could afford or tolerate. That gray area is now disappearing, and with it, a kind of informal balance that many long-term renters relied on. On paper, this sounds like a clear win. No one should have to buy a refrigerator just to move in. No renter should be stuck with a broken stove for months. Under the new law, if an appliance is recalled by the manufacturer, landlords must repair or replace it within 30 days. These protections are real, and for some renters, especially those moving frequently, they will feel like overdue common sense. But for seniors and people living on fixed incomes, the impact is more complicated and more emotional. Rules like this do not exist in a vacuum. They change behavior. Imagine a renter who has lived in the same unit for 10 or 15 years. The stove works, but it is old. The refrigerator hums loudly and barely keeps things cold. Under the old system, nothing happens unless something breaks completely. Under the new rules, those aging appliances are no longer just inconveniences. They become responsibilities, and responsibilities turn into costs. Landlords now carry clearer obligations. If something fails or is recalled, they must act quickly. Large property companies can absorb this. Small landlords, especially those with 1 or 2 units, often cannot without adjusting something else, and renters know what that adjustment usually looks like. Rent increases at renewal, stricter lease terms, fewer concessions. Sometimes a decision to sell or renovate rather than continue renting at the same rate. This is where unease sets in for older renters. Many seniors choose stability over perfection. They accept older appliances, dated kitchens, and fewer updates because what they value most is knowing where they will be next year and the year after that. When the rules change, that trade-off becomes harder to maintain. Improvements that sound helpful on the surface can feel like threats when they disrupt a carefully balanced situation. Renting already carries a quiet stress. Even when things are going well, renters know the home ultimately belongs to someone else. New requirements add another layer of uncertainty. A letter from the landlord suddenly feels heavier. An inspection feels more consequential. A repair request carries an unspoken question. Will this come back to me later in higher rent? For people living on fixed incomes, this uncertainty matters as much as the money itself. A renter doesn't need proof that rent will go up to start worrying. The possibility alone changes how they think about their home. They begin to ask questions they didn't have to ask before. Should I stay here long-term? Should I start preparing to move even if I don't want to? Is it safer to leave now than wait for the rules to catch up with me? Unlike a one-time expense, rent reshapes life month after month. A small increase doesn't just affect one budget cycle. It changes long-term decisions. It influences where people shop, how often they see family, whether they can stay near doctors and familiar neighborhoods. For older Californians, those connections are not optional. They are part of staying healthy and independent. This is what makes the 2026 rental appliance law emotionally heavy. Even though it isn't cruel or reckless, it redefines what basic living means. And in doing so, it changes the math for everyone involved. Renters gain protections, but also inherit new uncertainties. Landlords gain responsibilities, but also reasons to adjust prices. The system tightens from both sides. Number 3, healthcare relief with limits. Insulin copays capped at $35. What happens when the medication that keeps you alive finally stops shocking you at the pharmacy counter, but you still don't trust that the relief will last? That is the feeling many Californians are carrying as 2026 approaches. After years of hearing stories about stretching insulin doses, delaying refills, or quietly choosing rent over medicine, a $35 cap sounds like real progress. Yet for many people, that sense of comfort comes with a lingering question. Is this true security, or just a short pause in a long struggle? Under the new rules, insulin costs for some insured Californians will be capped at $35 per month. Combining copays, coinsurance, and deductibles into one clear limit. For people who have lived with unpredictable pharmacy bills, this number offers something rare in healthcare: predictability. It means walking into a drugstore without bracing for bad news. It means no longer doing mental math at the counter, wondering whether this month's cost will be manageable. That alone changes how people move through everyday life. But this relief does not reach everyone equally. Whether the cap applies depends on the type of insurance you have, how that plan is regulated, and when it falls into the rollout timeline. For older Californians, insurance is rarely simple. Many are navigating Medicare, supplemental plans, former employer coverage, or messy transitions in between. When help comes with conditions, people don't relax. They start reading fine print. They start asking whether they qualify, and if not, when or if they ever will. That uncertainty carries extra weight because insulin is not flexible. It cannot be postponed, substituted, or skipped without consequences. For years, people have learned to plan their lives around refill dates and prices that could change without warning. Even a positive policy change feels fragile when it depends on eligibility and regulation. Relief that can be taken away doesn't feel like safety. It feels temporary. At the same time, insulin is only one part of a much larger healthcare picture. Lowering its cost eases pressure, but it doesn't erase the burden of doctor visits, lab work, medical supplies, and other prescriptions. For seniors living on fixed incomes, healthcare expenses don't arrive as a single bill. They come month after month, each manageable on its own, but heavy when added together. The $35 cap lightens the load, but it doesn't remove the weight entirely. What makes this change both encouraging and unsettling is how closely healthcare is tied to dignity. When insulin becomes affordable, people don't just save money, they regain a sense of control. They no longer have to bargain with their own health. That matters deeply. But when that peace of mind depends on paperwork, timing, and policy, it still feels conditional. This is why the insulin cap feels like both progress and a reminder of what's missing. It shows that the system can respond when pressure becomes impossible to ignore, but it also highlights how limited relief can be when it arrives in pieces. For many Californians, especially seniors living with diabetes, this law offers something invaluable: a moment to breathe. At the same time, it leaves an open question hanging in the air. Is this the beginning of lasting stability, or just a brief calm before the rules shift again? Number 4, everyday shopping changes. The expanded plastic bag ban. 2026 may not be remembered for one major law, but for a very small moment. Standing at the checkout, holding your groceries, and realizing you have no bag to carry them home. For many Californians, especially older adults, that moment isn't just inconvenient. It's a sign that familiar routines are being forced to change. Under the new rules, grocery stores, pharmacies, liquor stores, and convenience stores will no longer provide any plastic bags, including the thicker ones once labeled reusable. Shoppers must bring their own bags or buy paper bags for a small fee. On paper, it sounds simple. In real life, it is a change that repeats itself several times a week, all year long. For younger shoppers, this adjustment may feel minor. But for older Californians who shop often, carry heavier items, or rely on quick trips, plastic bags were part of everyday convenience. They were sturdy, easy to carry, less likely to tear, and could be reused at home. When they disappear, people don't just lose a bag, they lose a habit that worked for decades. There are exceptions. Some food assistance recipients can still receive paper bags at no cost, and thin produce bags for fruits and vegetables are not affected. But for most people, every shopping trip now comes with an extra step. Forgetting a bag leads to frustration. A torn paper bag turns into a mess. These moments aren't dramatic, but they interrupt routines that once felt effortless. The issue isn't just the few cents for a paper bag. It is the sense that small costs and small adjustments are showing up everywhere at once. For people on fixed incomes, those little expenses always require attention. And when even a routine grocery run takes more planning, daily life starts to feel less flexible. What makes this change feel deeper is the loss of spontaneity. A quick stop at the store used to be automatic. Now it requires preparation. When this shift happens alongside rising prices, tighter housing rules, and changing healthcare costs, it doesn't feel isolated. It feels like part of a broader pattern. The plastic bag ban won't upend daily life, but it slips into the smallest details. And those details are what people experience every day. When enough small conveniences disappear, life doesn't fall apart, but it becomes harder to move through. For many Californians, especially seniors, that is what makes 2026 feel different. Not because of one big shock, but because everything seems to require a little more effort than it used to. Number 5, worker protections. Limits on payback contracts. What if the reason you stayed in a job wasn't loyalty or stability, but fear of a bill you couldn't afford to pay back? For years, that quiet pressure has shaped decisions for many workers in California, especially older workers who couldn't risk starting over. In 2026, that pressure begins to ease, not with a dramatic announcement, but with a change that loosens a kind of financial trap people rarely talk about. California's new worker protection rules place limits on so-called payback contracts, agreements that require employees to repay training costs or relocation expenses if they leave a job early. These contracts were often presented as opportunities. Get trained, get help moving, get a better position. But buried in the fine print was a condition that mattered far more when life didn't go as planned. If you quit, were laid off, or needed to leave for health or family reasons, you could owe thousands of dollars. For younger workers, this was stressful. For older workers, it was paralyzing. Many people stayed in jobs that no longer fit their health, schedule, or abilities simply because they couldn't afford the penalty for leaving. The fear wasn't abstract. It showed up in everyday thoughts. What if I get sick? What if my hours change? What if I just can't do this anymore? Leaving didn't feel like a choice. It felt like a financial risk too big to take. Under the new rules, California limits how and when employers can enforce these repayment agreements. The goal isn't to eliminate training or advancement opportunities, but to stop situations where workers feel trapped by debt tied to their own employment. It is a shift away from punishment and toward balance. And for many people, that shift brings something they haven't felt in a long time: options. The impact of this change isn't loud. You won't see it on a paycheck. You won't notice it in a store. But it changes how people think about their working lives. Knowing that leaving a job won't automatically trigger a massive bill alters the emotional landscape. People can consider part-time work, different roles, or stepping away when their health demands it, without the same level of fear. For older workers approaching retirement, this matters deeply. Many are not looking to climb ladders anymore. They are trying to manage energy, health, and time. A job that once worked may no longer be sustainable, but the cost of leaving used to feel too high. Removing that barrier doesn't solve every problem, but it restores a sense of dignity. Staying becomes a choice again, not a financial sentence. There's also a broader ripple effect. When workers aren't locked in by debt, employers are encouraged to retain people by improving conditions rather than relying on penalties. That doesn't mean workplaces will suddenly become ideal, but it does rebalance power in small, meaningful ways. People who feel they can leave are often treated differently than people who feel they can't. This law doesn't guarantee better jobs or higher pay. It doesn't protect everyone equally, and it won't erase all unfair contracts overnight, but it removes one of the quietest sources of stress in the modern workplace: the fear that walking away will follow you as a bill you can't outrun. Number 6, buying a used car gets safer. What if the most stressful part of buying a used car wasn't the price, but the fear of what you don't see until it's too late? For years, that fear has followed Californians onto dealership lots, especially older buyers who can't afford costly surprises after the paperwork is signed. In 2026, that experience begins to change. Not by making cars cheaper, but by making the process clearer. Under California's new rules, used car dealers are required to be far more transparent about pricing. The advertised price must reflect what buyers actually pay, with tighter limits on surprise add-on fees that often appear at the final moment. In certain situations, buyers may also have a short window to return a vehicle, offering a rare second chance in a process that used to feel final the moment you drove off the lot. For many people, especially seniors, this matters more than it sounds. A used car is rarely an upgrade. It is transportation to doctor appointments, grocery stores, family visits, and daily routines. When something goes wrong after purchase, there isn't much financial cushion to absorb repairs or hidden costs. One bad deal can ripple through a fixed monthly budget for years. What made used car buying so stressful wasn't just dishonesty, but imbalance. Dealers knew the system. Buyers didn't. Fees were buried. Warranties were confusing. Decisions were rushed. People agreed to terms they didn't fully understand because they felt pressure to decide on the spot. These new rules don't eliminate risk, but they slow the process down enough for buyers to breathe. Clearer pricing changes the emotional dynamic. When the number you see is closer to the number you pay, trust has a chance to form. When extra fees are limited, buyers can compare options without constantly wondering what is hiding underneath. And when there's even a narrow return option, it reduces the sense that one wrong choice will haunt you for years. This doesn't mean buying a used car suddenly becomes easy. Cars still break down. Prices are still high. Financing can still be complicated, but the anxiety shifts. Instead of worrying about being tricked, buyers can focus on whether the car actually fits their needs. That difference matters, especially for older Californians who value predictability over perfection. There's also a broader effect at play. When transparency becomes the rule, it changes how dealers compete. Instead of relying on confusion, they are pushed to compete on price and service. That doesn't transform the market overnight, but it nudges it in a direction that favors buyers who don't have time, energy, or appetite for confrontation. For many Californians, this law won't feel dramatic. It won't make headlines in daily conversation, but it may show up as a calmer moment at a dealership desk, a contract that makes more sense, or the quiet relief of knowing you're less likely to be cornered into a bad decision. These new laws taking effect in 2026 may not feel shocking at first, but they quietly make everyday life more expensive and more complicated. As these small changes pile up, people realize they have been forced to adapt without ever being given time to prepare. If you are living in California and this feels uncomfortably familiar, hit like and subscribe to Tax Hack Pro so you can stay ahead of the changes and understand what is coming before it fully reaches your life. Thank you for watching all the way to the end. If you found this video helpful, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe to the channel so you won't miss our daily content. Now, feel free to check out some of our newest and best videos currently shown on your screen. Goodbye and see you in the next video.